Hello, this is David welcoming you to D&D History Hub and another look at the characters and concerns of the people of the past. Today, public criticism of Christianity and the churches is commonplace. There are channels here on YouTube, for example, which regularly critique Christians and their faith. But it's really no big deal in open societies. Those mocked can employ the same media to mock back or refute arguments if they so wish. It was a bit different in the 19th century. As British professor Richard Evans says, it was beyond doubt a religious age. He cites the Victorian era English historian J.A. Froude, who lists the benefits of the church. An established religion, says Froude, is the sanction of moral obligation. It gives authority to the commandments, creates a fear of doing wrong, and a sense of responsibility for doing it. However, in the 19th century, new ideas and theories such as Darwinism, Marxism, the rise of science and rationalism, they were steadily making an impact in a process that the American historian Thomas Heyck calls the secularization of thought. In this video, I'm going to take a quick look at one aspect of religious criticism in Australia in the last 20 years of the 19th century, from 1880 to 1900. This was a period in which a vast majority of Australians identified as Christian. In 1891, for example, 96% of the population of New South Wales identified as Christian, and census records reveals little evidence of a general decline in religion or of a mass defection from Christianity. So to criticize the faith was a little bit more daring than it is today. But between the years 1881 to 1901, the Sydney Bulletin newspaper regularly lampooned and mocked Christianity and Christians through words and cartoons. But despite the widespread affiliation to Christianity in the population, the Bulletin's circulation, then under the editorship of J.F. Archibald, and one of the most popular newspapers in Australia, continued to rise and rise. It was one of the most popular newspapers throughout the land, and it was read in the city and in the country, and by rich and by poor. I think this apparent paradox that, religion was Christianity was the established religion, but this newspaper was still criticizing it and its circulation was going up. I think it can be understood through the writings of Mikhail Bakhtin, particularly in his book Rabelais and His World. It's in this sense that the mockery, a critique and lampooning, it can be understood as a form of carnival or folk humour, which, says Bakhtin, celebrated temporary liberation from the prevailing truth and from the established order. It marked the suspension of all hierarchical rank, privileges, norms and prohibitions. I give a reference to this book and other works cited here in the description below. Let's take a look at a few of the criticisms now, all taken from the Bulletin in this period. So, in a commentary in June 1888 on a claim by church leaders that capital punishment was a Christian duty upheld by the Bible, the Bulletin declared that 19th century Christianity, feasts with kings, and banquets in palaces with tetrarchs and exarchs who govern in high places. The Saviour of men, Jesus, is no longer sought in a manger. No, his name is affixed to the directory of a sacerdotal banking establishment run exclusively on commercial principles. Christ, in his simple communism, says the writer, offended the Pharisees by eating with publicans and sinners. But the author goes on, the Christianity of the present is different. When the upright and perfect man of the 19th century doeth an alms, he sounds his trumpet before him, that he may have the glory of men. If the Christian believes in Christianity, he must believe in the recorded acts of Christ in the New Testament. When men came possessed of devils, came to the gentlest mortal that ever drew breath on earth, he did not hang them, he healed them. An October 1887 article focused on the opening in Sydney of the Magdalen Refuge for Fallen Women by the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, Cardinal Patrick Moran. So the writer gives a short history of prostitution, then asserts that the degradation of women began thousands of years ago in the East. Degradation of British women occurred under Christianity, an Eastern religion, but only at a slow pace because Christianity was more influenced by the New Testament than by the Old, by the teaching of Jesus, who was a socialist and a universal man, rather than Moses, who was an Easterner and a believer in the priest caste. However, after the Reformation, things changed because the Puritans aligned themselves with the Old Testament. Quoting, and on nothing did these fanatics pour out the vials of their wrath, temporal and spiritual, their punishments and disgrace, than on the sins of the flesh. Then first this hateful phrase of fallen women arose. Then the degradation of women as a principle and as a system began. Since then, society, dominated by the noisy dogmatism of the religious fanatics, had for close on 300 years been doing its best to make desperate every unchaste girl, to turn her into a professional prostitute, and then to beat her down and keep her in the gutter and keep her there. In 1890, the paper commented on a statement by the British Bishop of Peterborough, who said that any Christian state carrying out in all its relations the Sermon on the Mount, it could not exist for a week. The bishop said that it would not be possible for a state to forgive all injuries inflicted by foreign states or to forgive all criminals. The bishop's words, said the Bulletin, were a specious perversion of Christ's rudimentary lesson, adding, if the simple leading principles of the sermon had been upheld by the Christian Church since Christ died, it would, in this Anno Domini 1890, be beyond the power of human imagination to picture a bishop talking in such a way. In an 1890 Christmas editorial, Christianity was depicted as having pure and socialistic beginnings, but degenerated fatally under the Emperor Constantine. It was around 280 to 337 of the Common Era, and he was the first Roman emperor to profess Christianity, says the Bulletin, who built a gospel of gold and incense, of bigotry and lies, and traditions and grovelling expediency. Christianity thus became a loathsome parody of the original, layered over by fat hypocrisy and bloated, oily, fat men of God. The story, which began on the starlit hills of Judea, they write, was continued through many epochs of gore and slaughter, and wherever the foot of the Christian trod, the grass withered, the flower faded, and the earth was scorched as if by breath of pestilence. Throughout the 1890s, the Bulletin continues these kinds of attacks on the established church's alignment with authority. In commenting on a statement by the Reverend H. Latimer Jackson at St. James's Church in Sydney that Australia should have an established church, the Bulletin quickly dismissed the suggestion. Australia, rather, said the writer, should be a secular state, pointing out that some of the world's most exalted characters have professed either no faith at all or a very indifferent one, while most of the world's monsters have been devotees. In numerous cartoons in this period, the Protestant clergy are often depicted as weak, gullible fools, or as crotchety, dopey old Puritans. And the Catholic clergy were often stereotyped as burly, red-nosed, drunken Irishmen. One cartoon in 1900 summed up what the Bulletin saw as the futility of not just religion, but also of religious division. A double column, page one sketch depicted two old clergymen, one a Protestant, the other Catholic, wagging their fingers angrily at each other under a cross, which is written on either end of the lateral beam, to heaven via Rome, and on the other side, to heaven via Wittenberg. There's an extract from that cartoon in the thumbnail that heads into this video, and all the cartoons on that thumbnail are actually from the Bulletin in this period that I'm writing about now. The intellects of the clergy were challenged throughout the 1890s, in particular when they commented on topics such as divorce, temperance, suicide, morality, and crime. For example, a call by the Church of England Synod in Auckland, New Zealand, for community prayer for God's guidance in elections prompted the declaration that such appeals to prayer serve only to push back the advances of science into the wilderness of barbarism. Prayers for rain were a lazy man's substitute for irrigation, and prayers for wisdom for electors a substitute for education, and therefore utterly useless and ridiculous. On the matter of church efforts to promote temperance, an editorial declared that there was much to debate, but once religion was brought into the topic, extraneous idiocy came into play. The church promoted the cause of teetotalism with too much solemnity, says the writer, adding that the church never made a joke in its life and seldom appreciated one. On a debate in the Presbyterian church on whether it was permissible to use magic lanterns to illustrate sacred subjects, just sort of lighting up the subjects, the editorial declared that light is fatal to dogma and superstition. True faith is never so happy as when seated in a dim religious corner, hugging a dear delusion unobserved. The Bulletin places the blame for religious fervour on the English. The Anglo-Saxons' belief in the thick and loathsome species of piety is immeasurable, says one writer. Every great and utterly heartless swindler in recent years, in every land where the bulk of the population is of British descent, has been glaringly and horribly pious. Every broken bank and every broken boom is a monument to the many pillars of the church who have gone off with the cash, and to the little, round, fat, oily man of God who has been the person immediately responsible. Tell it like it is. Bulletin does tell us what it stands for. It says, civilization is based on intellectual skepticism, for doubt is the parent of knowledge, dogmatism the handmaid of error. A great day dawned when humanity began to doubt. There is no proof whatsoever of the existence of a deity, which is precisely the reason why the intellectual savage is so confident that it exists. There's very much more like this. This is just a sample from the Bulletin of that era. I hope you enjoyed it, or not. Perhaps you can let me know. So thank you for listening. Goodbye.